Hi there, my name is Dave Pantos. I'm an attorney licensed here in the state of Nebraska. So here's what we're going to talk about today. We'll talk about this agenda. So the agenda talks about itself. I will talk about me. Love to do that. Then we're going to talk about the major different types of business organizations. And I will say this, you'll notice the last thing, please ask questions throughout. I want this to be useful to all of you. So like I have a presentation which has things in it that I thought were important, but maybe you have different things that are important, and that's totally cool. I'm here for you because they have fed me, so therefore. That's all it really takes. Okay, so major different types of organizations. Then I'm going to kind of drill into LLCs, how to form an LLC under Nebraska law, what other steps you have to take to kind of create and maintain an LLC. Then just kind of some general information about the typical role of an attorney in a small business context, why you might need a lawyer. And then I'm going to talk about trade names, because something that's come up a lot for me and my clients is like, oh, we have this LLC or this proprietorship or whatever, but we want to use a different name for the public. How do we go about doing that? I get a lot of questions about BOIR because that is a new thing this year that it's interesting. So this is a federal requirement. I've noticed that like literally every other state I do corporate work in, the Secretary of State's or the business website for that state has all this information about BOIR and like what you have to do. Nebraska doesn't, from what I've seen, at least as of yesterday. So I don't know why they're being like that, but so we'll talk about BOIR and conclusions and questions. And then again, please throughout, if you just have like a random question, the disclaimer is I will answer anything. It's not legal advice per se, because we don't necessarily have an attorney-client relationship. So just any answer I give you is going to be within that context. Well, I do have an attorney-client relationship with maybe a couple people in this room actually, but you know what I mean. Okay, cool. About me, hi, I'm Dave Pantos. So I'm a local attorney. I have an experience and expertise with small businesses, the nonprofit sector. As it says down here, I also do a lot of representation of tenants. I do volunteer work in eviction court for poor people that are facing eviction. I do some estate work as well, but kind of my primary areas are landlord-tenant, small business, and nonprofit. I have scores of current clients who are either small businesses or nonprofits. I went to Indiana University, Bloomington School of Law, which is now called the Michael Maurer School of Law, because Michael Maurer gave millions of dollars to my law school, so they renamed it after him. That's just how it works. So someday you will be so successful you can get things named after you. I stole that picture, so copyright violation right there. So you can spot all the legal issues in my presentation. As of next month, I will have been an attorney for 28 years. I was originally licensed to practice law in Colorado. Later, I became licensed in New York, New Jersey, and then Nebraska. So now I'm licensed to practice law both in the state of Nebraska, so under the Nebraska Supreme Court, as well as the Federal District Court that's headquartered here in Omaha. So I've done a little bit of federal court work as well, like bankruptcies, that kind of thing. Don't love that kind of work. My office is in this building. I actually started my own office here in Elevator literally like a year ago this week. I think it was maybe September 12th, so roughly. So I'm in room 327 upstairs. So I love being a lawyer. In addition to practicing law, I also teach 2 classes at University of Nebraska, Omaha. I teach environmental law in person to environmental science students, and then I also teach an online class called Introduction to Sustainability. I'm very passionate about sustainability issues. So I've got a little bit of an environmental law background as well. Actually, I have a master's degree in environmental science. I'm really highly educated. Okay. So again, at any point, ask any questions, stop me at any point. Probably like once you've eaten, then that brain flow will be happening and you'll start thinking about the stuff that you came here with. Okay, what are the major types of business organizations in the state of Nebraska? So you have limited liability companies, and again, that's going to be the focus today just because I wanted to tailor this presentation to small businesses. Frankly, I don't really do much in terms of C Corps. Generally, it's mostly LLCs that I represent, as well as nonprofit organizations. So you've got limited liability companies, nonprofit corporations, C corporations, which are just like, when you think of a business corporation, that's a C corporation. S corporations, which aren't a distinct corporate entity in Nebraska. That's kind of more of a tax designation, but those do exist. There's sole proprietorships. There's limited liability partnerships. Obviously, there are professional organizations. So like, I'm an LLC, my law firm is an LLC, but it's a professional one. So in addition to what I'll talk about today in forming your LLC, I had to go through an extra step through the Nebraska Supreme Court to get certified to be a law firm. Similarly, like if you're a mental health practitioner, when you set up an LLC, you also have to submit information from the Department of Health and Human Services about your license, et cetera. But basically, a lot of these rules are pretty consistent throughout. There's also a relatively new entity in Nebraska called a B Corporation. There's only a couple of them that I'm aware of so far. It's kind of more widespread in other parts of the country. These are basically for-profit entities that are allowed to have a social mission as part of their kind of vectors for value. So in addition to delivering value to shareholders, they can also benefit the community as part of their mission, even though they're for-profit. So it's kind of almost like a hybrid between a C Corp and a nonprofit charity. So again, it's kind of limited so far because it's a certification process. So there's only a couple that I know about in Nebraska. But I kind of encourage my clients who are interested in it, like, hire me to do this because I'd love to do one in Nebraska because there's so few of them. Okay, but let's focus on limited liability companies because again, small businesses, typically the choice of entity for small businesses, once you kind of go from just like it just being you, just doing stuff in your basement to like, oh, okay, this is a real thing. Typically, when folks come to me for this kind of help, what they're looking to do is form an LLC. So I wanted to talk about LLCs primarily. And before I move on, any questions or anything? How's the lunch? Pretty good? It's Jimmy John's, so can't go wrong.
Also, if you have any questions, let me know, and I'm going to hand you a mic for talking to.
Yeah.
And then this will also be recorded and posted. So
yeah.
do it afterwards.
Yeah. Thank you, Josh. I love these elevator people. They're all awesome. Okay, so LLCs, limited liability companies, provide, as the name implies, limited liability to their members. Why is that important? Well, yeah, if you're just doing stuff on your own out there as a solo, well, you're going to be liable legally for any bad actions or negligence or whatever that might occur. As an LLC, you're now an entity, a business entity, and you can go and get insurance and protection and all those kinds of things. LLCs require representation by a licensed attorney in legal proceedings. So if you've created an LLC, it's unauthorized practice of law then to just sort of, one of the members to show up and act as their own attorney. You have to get a lawyer. So LLCs are authorized under Nebraska Revised Statutes 21-102, and then thereafter, there's a whole bunch of different provisions. Nebraska has incorporated into their statute the Uniform Limited Liability Company Act. So basically what happens is this, and this is kind of wonky, but you should all know. So all of these corporate laws, both in Nebraska and in other states, they are all state law, and they all read pretty much the same. That's not a mistake. There are committees of things like the American Bar Association and their affiliates that come up with model language for things like organizing corporations, LLCs, et cetera, and then each state basically says, oh, okay, that looks pretty good for us, so instead of us making up our own local corporate laws, we just take those uniform corporate laws, and it goes through the state legislature, gets passed through a committee, passed by the whole legislature, signed by the governor, and it becomes our law. So that's why corporate laws are pretty similar in each state, but there are sometimes differences as well. But with respect to LLCs, we've incorporated the Uniform Limited Liability Company Act that was drafted nationally. So a limited liability company may have any lawful purpose. Obviously, you can't set up an LLC for a criminal enterprise. Not saying it hasn't been done, but you're not supposed to. And it's of perpetual duration unless you indicate otherwise when you file the LLC. So if you create an LLC, it will exist forever as long as you pay the $27 fee to the Secretary of State. And certainly, some folks forget to do that. If you move your address and you don't let them know, the little postcard that comes out doesn't get to you, then you don't file. And then usually about 6 months into the year, they deactivate you, and then you have to pay a $30 reactivation fee. So again, the entity will exist in perpetuity as long as you pay the fees. A limited liability company has the capacity to sue and be sued on its own name, and it has the power to do all things necessary or convenient to carry out its activities, including the power to render a professional service within or without the state. So just because an LLC is organized within Nebraska doesn't mean it can't act in other parts of the country. Oftentimes when you want to kind of have operations in other parts of the country, you've got a couple options. You have your LLC here, you go onto the Secretary of State's website of another state and figure out, okay, you hire a lawyer to do this, obviously, and register as a foreign LLC in that state. So that's something you can do. You can act here and elsewhere. But yeah, it's basically the kind of whole point of it is that it's the sort of zero entry or kind of easy entry into doing business for whatever lawful purpose in the state of Nebraska. It's something you don't really think about because you just kind of do it, but there is this sort of legal framework for us to be able to organize ourselves as a small business or a corporation that is respected as its own entity with its own rights. It's a totally fictitious thing. It's not like based in nature at all. It's all legally created from these statutes. Any questions about this before I move on? Great. So how to form an LLC in Nebraska. The first thing you need to form an LLC in the state of Nebraska is something called a certificate of organization. Now, forming different entities in Nebraska, slightly different names. So if it's a corporation or a nonprofit corporation, you have articles of incorporation, right? Incorporation's in the name. With an LLC, it's a certificate of organization. So I wanted to kind of go through the basic elements of a certificate of organization. It's really basic. I often tell folks, look, you see these multi-page certificates of organizations. There's basic stuff that go in them. It's less than a page long. You need a name, and I'm actually going to get into some of the details about what's an okay name to use for an LLC and what's not in a future slide. Street address and mailing address for the initial registered office. So if you're going to create an LLC in Nebraska, it's kind of a no-brainer. It has to be in Nebraska. And so oftentimes, if, great example is, I mentioned I do a lot of landlord-tenant work. A lot of the apartments in Omaha, for example, but also throughout Nebraska, are owned by companies that are not Nebraska based, but oftentimes what they do is they register LLCs in the state of Nebraska to own a property. And oftentimes, because they don't have a physical presence here, they'll hire a registered agent. So there are businesses that act as registered agents for foreign companies. Purpose, name and address of the registered agent. Oftentimes, if you're creating your own LLC, you're probably going to be the registered agent. When you create a new LLC and sign up as a registered agent, it saves your information on the Secretary of State's website. So if you create another LLC 2 years later and you put yourself in there, it's going to remember you and save a little bit of time in terms of filing. Purpose of the company. As I mentioned earlier, the purpose can be anything that's lawful. And it doesn't have to be even unique. You know, if there's another business also selling, marked up LaCroix, you can do that. Effective date of the organization. I mean, so typically, when you file, the effective date is the date that you file. But sometimes, you maybe want to file now to kind of get the name registered, but you're not actually going to start doing business for a couple months or whatever. So it gives you some flexibility. Membership. Who are the members of the LLC? If it's just a sole member LLC, it's just you. If it's you and your 3 partners, then it's the 4 of you. That gets listed in the certificate of organization. Finally, signature of the organizer. So you pick one of the members, and that person's name and signature goes at the bottom of the certificate of organization, and then you put the date on the form as well. And that is your certificate of organization. So here's a sample certificate of organization. This is the most recent LLC I created for a client. It was Monday, I think. Stone King Entertainment. This is a new LLC created in Lincoln, Nebraska. So this, you can see the elements here. This is going to be a sole member LLC. So we've got the name in the first line, and I state in there that it's compliant with Section 21108 of Nebraska Revised Statutes, which we'll get into a little bit more in a minute. Street address, mailing address, and you're probably wondering, why is Dave putting up all this confidential information about his client? This is all publicly available. I'm not doing anything wrong here. He said he was fine with it. I think he said that, for sure. Okay, so name and mailing address of the registered agent. So the incorporator, the former of this, the sole member is Brandon. The description of the company. You can see it's just one sentence. You don't have to go through a whole paragraph about what, all aspects of your operation. Just a simple, clean sentence about the organization. The effective date of the certificate of organization, date of the filing, who's the membership, just one dude, signed, and then it's cut off, but the date's right under that. So you see here, it's got an e-signature. So for my clients, what I do is when I draft a certificate of organization, I put it into my case management system, which has its own DocuSign feature. So I put it in there and I send it to them so they can just do an e-sig. I noticed sometimes if you just submit a signature like this without the kind of ID thing on there, the Secretary of State will reject it. So for a while, I was requiring my clients to give me a wet signature on these documents, and now I'm finding though that they'll approve it if it's got an ID on there. I don't know. Sometimes I feel like some folks at the Secretary of State are stricter than others. So sometimes it can get bounced back if they just say, "Oh, you just typed a signature." Yeah, Dan. Oh.
Josh,
What's that?
what kind of mic do you have a question?
Dan has a question and would like a mic.
Let's see.
Wake up, Josh.
Uh-oh. Hopefully this is working.
You made a big fun of this.
There you go.
Just kidding.
Now he forgot his question.
No, I'll be as specific as possible. On point 4 here, in this example of a company organized of multimedia business designed to promote the video gaming industry, can you speak a little bit about how much leeway this person has to At what point would they need to organize a different company if the description of the business were going to change? So the examples that came to my mind were if he were building video game consoles and selling them, becoming a video game production studio, or selling hot dogs. Like, can you just share a little bit about how much leeway you have in item 4 there?
That's a great question, Dan. And I don't really get into this in the presentation too much, so I'm glad you asked the question. I think in that case, if the business was actually fundamentally changing, but you wanted to keep that name. So the reason it's called Stone King, it's not just because it's a metal sounding name. It is kind of metal sounding. That's his wife's maiden name. So he wanted to use that, and because it's cooler than bowels. So let's say he wants to keep Stone King, right? But the business has changed. All he would do is file an amended and restated certificate of organization. So he keeps the name, changes the business. So that's, now if he was agnostic on the name and wanted to keep doing this, but then was now also selling hot dogs, sure. What you do is either create a new LLC that's owned by Stone King, you could do that, or just have a separate LLC with different membership. So, great question. Yeah.
I don't know if we need the mic.
Josh says you need the mic.
There was a data breach fairly recently, and it was a former Dade County Sheriff's officer who had an LLC registered for movie production and something else, and yet he had one of these, server farms in an apartment. So I've heard that there's quite a bit of leeway as far as the court is concerned on what the actual business operations are. Is that true?
So I think that's also really good. What's your name?
Vince.
Vince, thanks for that question. So Vince asked how much leeway. Is that Dade County, like as in Florida?
His business was that public data company that got hacked, and then millions of Americans. And then they were like, how does this shady business have all these people's personal records?
Yeah.
And it was registered as like a movie company. So
Okay. This isn't Ashley Madison, right? Because that was Canada. Did anyone see that documentary?
Miami.
Yeah, okay.
To your point there.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that question. So the question is, what kind of leeway is there? It's like everything, right? If you're driving on I-80 in Hall County and you're going 150 miles an hour and no one sees you, you're going to get away with it, right? You're not going to get in trouble. It's the same kind of thing. If your LLC greatly diverts from the stated purpose and the certificate of organization, unless someone calls you out on it and says, hey, wait a second, this person is selling hot dogs, but their C of O says multimedia and complains about it to the Secretary of State, you'll be able to keep doing it, right? There's no the Attorney General isn't going around checking to make sure that your C of O connects with your business. And largely that's because, not largely, but I think why there isn't a lot more of that scrutiny is because there is a little bit of a barrier to getting this information from the Secretary of State's website. You have to go onto the website, you have to find the company or the LLC, and you have to pay a small fee to download this document. And for most people, they're not going to want to do that. But it's a good point. So unless you're actually called out on it and the issue is raised to some regulatory official, Secretary of State, Attorney General, not much is going to happen. And I don't think anyone should drive that fast. It was just an example.
So this guy was formerly a sheriff, so we don't know, how nefarious it was versus like incompetence, right?
Yeah.
We're like, what if he just like shifted gears, right? And like, because he has an IMDb and everything.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and again, Dade County, Florida. I will say this, in these kind of more diverse states like Florida, it's a lot more interesting in terms of this stuff. Nebraska tends to largely be, folks kind of self-comply when it comes to corporate and LLC stuff. But that's an interesting, I need to look into that. Any other questions? I appreciate these great questions. Okay, Stone King. Okay, can everyone read that? I'm sure this will be provided to you. I can provide this presentation. So what name can you use? So I think this is actually probably the most interesting part of forming a new LLC, and certainly the biggest risks. And this has definitely happened to me before where, like anytime someone asks me, okay, I need help creating this LLC or corporation or whatever. Here's the name I'm thinking of using. And if the name sounds fine to me, what I do is I get onto the Secretary of State's website, and they have a corp search feature where you can search, what are all the registered names, and you can kind of do it like sounds like, or first name exact match or whatever. So I just kind of do all those searches to make sure that that name isn't already being used. Now there's some names like Stone King, which are obviously no one's even coming close to that because it's very unique to that person's name. Sometimes the name is like Midwest whatever, or Huskers this or that. So there's a lot of those kinds of things, right? And what I've noticed in terms of what the Secretary of State will allow, and you can see right here, the LLC must not be the same or deceptively similar to, in the records of the Secretary of State, the name of each person that's not an individual, that's incorporated, each name reserved under statute. So each name reserved under statute, what does that mean? That means someone has, prior to this, reserved a name, either a trade name or filed an LLC or other company, and now it's statutorily protected by the Secretary of State and, by derivation, the Attorney General. So if there is a similar or the same kind of name, now again, there's things like Midwest this, Huskers that, Nebraska whatever, Omaha this, you can't reserve a trade name or incorporate or file a LLC for a really generic kind of name. Like if you wanted to say, Midwest Company, they would say, look, there's so many things called Midwest, it's too similar to all those other Midwest. Now, if you said Midwest fruit juice drinking company, like that's okay, Midwest, generic, but all the rest of it is unique, that would pass muster. And that's something I've had to do with some clients is, hey, let's, if you want to have that Midwest in there, fine, but we need to add extra stuff in there to make it significantly different from other entities that are already registered. It can be really dicey, and all this stuff with like trade names, intellectual property, copyright, all that kind of stuff. It's state law and it's federal law. We're mostly talking about state law today. So the present user, registrant, or owner of the non-complying name has to consent to a similar name. So if there's an existing company with pretty much the same name, I know they're going to bounce us back, but it looks like the owner of this name isn't really using it. Like there's, it's active in the Secretary of State, but there's no website, no Facebook page, no apparent activity. Maybe we should reach out to the registered agent and say, hey, look, would you be willing to sign off on us using a very similar name since you don't seem to be using it? Sometimes they'll say, no, I was planning on doing something with it, stop bothering me. Sometimes they'll say, oh, yeah, actually, that's totally fine. So there is a process by which you can successfully apply to use a name that's substantially similar to an existing name, or even the same, but you have to get the owner to comply, and there's a form you go through for that. So yeah, the naming part, it's kind of almost the hardest part of this is, because the more companies there are, the more names that are being used. Anyway, any questions? Other important steps outside of the certificate of organization. So once you draft your certificate of organization, you have to submit it to the Nebraska Secretary of State. Mostly this is done online. Secretary of State of Nebraska, like pretty much every state, if not every state, has some kind of online portal for the submission of electronic documents. Some of these are more robust than others, or easier to use than others. I would say the Nebraska one isn't like the most intuitive. For example, I've done a few in Missouri, a lot more user-friendly, I think. Other states, more user-friendly, more information. I think the Secretary of State of Nebraska seems like it's set up to promote attorneys having more work to do because it's just harder. It's good for us. So you use this online portal, Secretary of State. So obviously, as an attorney who does a lot of these filings, I have my own registration. So they've got my bank account on there and everything. So I always, log in, and it's pretty streamlined for me to submit an LLC or corporate or nonprofit corporation. Usually for a new LLC, it's $102 to get your certificate of organization filed. For those who are curious, nonprofit corporations, it's $27. I think C Corp is kind of more in the 100 to 200 range. Everything costs something, so, and if you let your LLC expire and you have to redo it, it's at least $30, if not more, to do that. So basically, it's a combination of filing that certificate of organization and inputting information that's on the certificate of organization already. You have to make sure that whatever you input on their online system is exactly the same as the certificate of organization. If you get a zip code wrong, a digit on a zip code, they're going to flag it and just knock it back and say, hey, the wrong zip code here, whatever, you got to redo it. So it's you got to be really detail oriented, which I am not. So why do I do this work? I figured it out. It's fine. I've got my own ways. So if it's done correctly, the Secretary of State approves certificates and stamps them within 24 to 40 hours. It's a fairly quick process. It kind of was like, during COVID, it got to a week long, and now they're pretty much back to, for the most part, I had to renew my UCC filing, and that took 2 weeks, but that was different. So certification is done. I recommend, I don't think it's required, and I'll give a distinction, to file with a local legal publication as well. If you create a new LLC, usually costs $50 to do so. You absolutely have to do this if you're registering a trade name. So if you have, Midwest Fund Incorporated LLC as an LLC, and then you want to create a new trade name for that, you go through the Secretary of State. I'll talk about this more in a few minutes. That definitely has to be published. Your notice of incorporation initially, or certificate of organization, I don't think it's required, but it's a good business practice, and it's just another $50. Then you go to the IRS website to get an EIN for your new LLC, and it gives you options. It says, hey, are you doing this because you're going to have employees? Is it just for banking requirements? Is it a new business? You just kind of go through that process. So it's got a bunch of questions that are not super difficult to figure out. Just a kind of thing I noticed, if you Google, new EIN, the first 5 hits are companies that have paid Google to come up first, and they charge you $250 to get something that's literally free from the IRS website, and it takes 10 to 15 minutes. So I've just noticed that. There's always scammers out there. And then finally, and I'm kind of saying this because I've noticed that if you want to open a bank account for your new LLC, most banks require this. So they require that stamped certificate of organization from the Secretary of State, your EIN from the IRS, and an operating agreement. Now, if you're a sole member LLC, you may be thinking, why do I need an operating agreement? It's just going to be me. Most banks seem to require that. And I'm going to get into what goes into an operating agreement in a little bit. So you have an operating agreement. If you have more than one member, whatever, everyone has to sign it. And then, then you go ahead and open a separate bank account for your LLC. So you're not mixing your funds with your personal funds with the LLC. So those are some of the main steps. James needs a box.
I'm backtracking. I wasn't quick enough when you asked before if we had any questions. So if someone has their LLC registered on the state level, but they also have the national trademark, the registered trademark with USPTO, does that actually protect it in every single state from somebody opening up a company in that name?
That's a really good question. So James's question, I think I'm getting this right, is about the kind of state-federal interaction in terms of copyright protection. So if you've got a name that's registered through the U.S. Copyright Office, does that sort of retrofit to a protection on the state level in terms of a name? Yeah, is that the question? Yeah, I feel like it doesn't. So I do feel like what you need to do is protect yourself on both ends. So if you're about to form this is what I advise clients, there's a LLC to be with a cool name. You already have the name, but you're not going to be ready to like have that LLC for months. You can register the trade name with the state of Nebraska, and you can do the same with the Copyright Office. Don't wait to do that until you're ready for your company to actually exist. Register the trade name. You can register the trade name months in advance.
If you're in all 50 states, you can hardly register in all 50 states. How do you do that?
You do that, yeah, because you want the state level protection as well. Yeah, you just do it. People do it all the time.
50 different.
You should have to hire like a really good attorney for that and pay them a hefty retainer. That's my recommendation. Yeah, no, it's true. You have to do that. Yeah, they're kind of separate because one has to do with the protection of that corporate identity in that state based on their statutory protections. The other is like, can you use this name on Amazon.com to sell products or whatever? Totally different. Yeah. Sorry. Oh, I guess that wasn't the answer you were hoping for. All right, business operating agreements. That's a good question, though. Yeah, I will fully disclose. I've dabbled in copyright law. I'm not like a huge expert in it, but I do understand the basics. And one of the things that I've actually had to do for clients is, I guess I could talk about this later, but it's an interesting thing. And some of you may have seen this. There are major, I guess I should say, large law firms and companies that literally just sue people for copyright infringement for using pictures on websites that aren't that have copyright protection or alleged copyright protection, right? And they demand huge amounts of money. So sometimes, you'll have a company that sets up their website and they think they're using like a stock image that's licensed. Yeah, something like that, which, I got that from PowerPoint. But sometimes you'll say, I want to put a picture of this one client literally came up with a recipe for like a mushroom shrimp burger, and they, I guess, Googled images for like that, and they found an image somewhere, and then 2 years, and again, this was like on a really obscure part of their website. They get this letter from this company from Toronto saying, you have to pay us $900 because of your shrimp burger picture. And I was like, so they hired me, and like I emailed the person and I was like, well, did you actually, so they took the picture off on my advice. I was like, just take it off. Is this a copyright did you register this image with the Copyright Office? Because it wasn't like the company, it was like they had a contract with this like creator, and it was just really kind of sketchy. And they were like, well, no, but that doesn't matter. We can still sue you. I'm like, no, you can't. But then I Googled these guys, and they do have like a big law firm that does sue people for this kind of thing. So it's like, yeah, it's crazy. Okay, so business operating agreements. So what are the things that go in a business operating agreement? And again, you may be thinking, it's just a sole member thing, whatever. But yeah, these are things that you should have in place. If you expand to have something this in place, and then you can modify it for additional members. Management structure for the LLC. Who's the manager? Who are the folks who just are kind of along for the ride? Admitting new members, getting rid of members, profit and loss allocation, capital contributions, series within the LLC, meetings of the members, voting, who has greater voting power or whatever, amendments to the membership, the business operating agreement, rights and powers of manage, which is grammatically incorrect. It should say rights and powers of the manager, election and removal of managers, and finally indemnification. So those are the 10 significant elements that should be in a business operating agreement. So anytime I draft one, I always copy the last one that I did and modify it slightly to save time. But these are the 10 things that typically go into a business operating agreement for an LLC, and just regardless of the size. The key thing is it's a lot of boilerplate stuff. 80% is boilerplate, 20% is unique, especially the allocation of capital, which is usually an appendix at the end of the business operating agreement. Any questions about that? So this is a thing that lawyers do. Role of an attorney. So I kind of was just wondering, okay, well, what will be useful for people in this presentation? Kind of like, well, when might you need an attorney versus stuff that you can do on your own? My recommendation is focus on your core business and hire a lawyer for everything else. That's just my own marketing. So what are things attorneys do for small businesses? And these are basically things that I've done for clients, and so there may be other things as well. And certainly you can ask me, and I promise not to say, yes, you need an attorney for that every time, unless it's true. So UCC filings. So if you're a business and you are, for example, like you have a promissory note with a borrower for investing in a building or whatever, typically you will hire an attorney to create a UCC lien, which then gets filed with the Secretary of State. That helps to protect the business interest in terms of that capital or however much money has been loaned. Usually it's secured by the stuff that the borrower has. So that's an example. Another big one, commercial lease reviews. So if you're going from being in elevator spaces to your own new location, the elevator spaces agreement, obviously it's 100% ironclad. There's no problems with that. But if you are going to get a commercial lease here in Omaha or throughout Nebraska, my experience is that the kind of generic commercial landlord lease lacks key provisions that would benefit a commercial tenant. So what I will usually do is I will review those leases and ask for, on behalf of my client, more than I think that the landlord will agree to. Sometimes they're just like, that would never happen in Nebraska. Whatever. Sometimes they get away with it. Like just things like, well, what happens if the landlord doesn't comply with, keeping the air conditioner going, or what happens if there's a flood, or what if the landlord goes out of business, or whatever. Just stuff like that to protect my client. On the flip side, if I'm representing the landlord, I won't do any of those things. Now, I try to make them do fair things, obviously. But yeah, that's a big thing, is reviewing commercial leases and making sure they're fair for your client. And drafting operating agreements, which is the thing we just talked about, business operating agreements. Obviously filing originating documents with the Secretary of State, which would also include amending and restating those certificates of organization, again, if the business changes, but you want to keep cool names like Stone King. And then any other Secretary of State filings. I don't think you need an attorney for the biennial certification, that $27 fee where you just basically confirm that you're still at the same address and pay the fee. You don't need a lawyer for that. I don't think you really need a lawyer for your EIN. I just offer it to clients for free since I'm already creating their business and doing all the other stuff. It's just one of those things that takes an extra 10 minutes, and I do it so frequently that it's just more efficient that way, but I don't charge extra for it. Advising as to board structure or org structure or choice of entity. Oftentimes you're just like, well, I don't know what here's my idea for my business. This is what I think it's going to look like. I don't know what the right entity is. Should it be an LLC? Should it be a C Corp? I've been in business as an LLC for a couple of years. Should I elect S Corp designation? Those are kinds of things you can talk through with your attorney. Some questions may not be appropriate for an attorney, but for an accountant or a tax advisor, usually your attorney should tell you that. Employment law issues, and I've got another slide on that. HR issues, again, intellectual property, copyright issues, infringement issues. Like, if you get in some like scary email about the shrimp burger on your website, you contact your attorney. And I really tell people this, so many times clients with a problem come to me after they've created the problem, and I'm like, oh, if you just contacted me like 2 months earlier before you made this stupid decision, whatever. Sometimes it's just like, run the thing by the attorney. If it's a quick question, often you won't even get charged for it. So anyways, here's some examples. Some employment law issues I've had to work on for clients. Now again, for super small businesses, you don't have employees, so this may not be as relevant to you, but here's just some examples of things I've worked on for small businesses and corporations. Wage and hour issues. Great example, I have a client that is a beauty salon in Lincoln, and they had this idea where they had hairstylists working for them, and their idea was, well, we want them to be independent contractors, not employees, but we also want it so that they can only work for us, and we get to tell them when they're working, we control this, I was like, look, either if you want to control them, they have to be employees. You can't have independent contractors solely under control. That is a violation of even the most conservative states' labor laws. Unless you're an Uber driver, it's totally different. But yeah, so wage and hour issues, language in your employee handbook, what is kind of just up to date in terms of compliance with state and federal law, misconduct investigations. If you have employees and there's an allegation of misconduct, it's great to bring in a third party to impartially investigate that misconduct allegation. I did so for a client recently where there was, allegations of sexual harassment and It's good to just get that out of the office and have a third party look at those. It doesn't have to be an attorney. There are some HR consultants who do these things as well. But I do find no disrespect to other experts in HR, but attorneys, we're so trained in confidentiality and all that kind of stuff that I think we're, good entities to do these investigations. Obviously, compliance with state and federal law, things are changing all the time. And just generally speaking, training on things like harassment, training on other things, providing trainings to staff about hey, here's the latest in this area of law that's relevant to your business. Any questions? Okay, some other attorney services. It's great how PowerPoint just comes up with graphics for you. Responding to subpoenas. So I've had it's weird, there's nothing worse than getting a subpoena, right? Or just anything signed by a judge out of the blue. And oftentimes, as a business owner or a member of an LLC, you may be a third party, or maybe even not even a third party, but just an entity that has information that's relevant to an existing county or district court case. And you may receive a subpoena out of the blue requiring all this information. I often see this with my clients who are mental health therapists. If there's a knockdown, drag out divorce and child custody case, they'll ask for all the therapist notes and everything involving that child who's in therapy or the mom or whatever. Responding to subpoenas is a big thing. You bring in the attorney, they can review that. And what I would do is if the subpoena was overbroad, I'd file a motion like kind of almost a protection order, limiting the scope of the subpoena to only those things that I think are complying with state and federal law. Addressing and preventing litigation. If you're sued, you're sued. You know, the more successful your business becomes and grows, the more likely it will be that you will be sued, typically frivolously, but sometimes for, you know, legit reasons. How do you address litigation when it comes, and how do you try to prevent it or get out of it when it maybe it's threatened? So sometimes I'll have clients who will receive, you know, some kind of demand that says, well, I'm going to sue you for $1 million on Friday if you don't pay up today, that kind of stuff. So we can address, you know, is this legit? Is it frivolous? What are the possible risks and outcomes? In the case of litigation, recruiting counsel. You know, I never promise to my clients that I can do everything for them. And, you know, if there is litigation and there is a lawsuit that involves an area of law that, you know, I'm not familiar with, what I'll do is I will assist in recruiting appropriate counsel to address that litigation. You know, if it's an insurance lawsuit, you know, malpractice or whatever, those are things that are kind of just outside of the scope. I know you're probably thinking, it seems like Dave knows everything, but, you know, I don't. So it's important to recognize that. Compensation and other financial arrangements, you know, just like what's appropriate structure for compensation of employees, what's compliant with state and federal law, and then just general contract review. Business is very much based on contracts, and oftentimes there are disparities between parties in a contract. So if you're a small business and you're contracting with a much larger entity, it's good to have someone who can review that contract and maybe redline areas that might be of concern to you. So those are kind of the major list of things that attorneys do. I know there's other things as well, but this is kind of like stuff that I've done in the last 2 months, so it's fresh in my mind. But there's lots of other things too. It's really good to just have counsel who's kind of like seen a lot and done a lot, who can kind of just give you that sort of like support, you know, rather than just trying to figure it out on your own or Googling the right answer. And I think that is kind of a risk right now, is that there are so many tools out there, you know, whether it's AI tools or Google or whatever, where it almost seems like, oh, I could do this on my own. And then, you know, you find out 6 months later that the AI was hallucinating or created some case, and it still does happen. So whatever. I mean, I'm not saying don't use AI, because I don't want them to kill me. AI, right? Skynet or whatever. Not paranoid. It's just true. Okay. Yeah, so I wanted to talk a little bit about, because this is something that's asked of me by clients, is, yeah, I've got this LLC. I don't like the name anymore. All the people who don't have Stone King as their name. I want to do this DBA. And so one thing that's important is this, you know, if you're creating an LLC that's going to have a name, and then, but you want to do business as another name, you can't accomplish that with one filing. So you can't like file a certificate of organization that says, you know, Bob's Landscaping Services doing business as Steve's Landscaping Services or whatever. You can't do that. Why can't you do that? Well, I figured it out. It's because what you have to do is create the LLC and then separately apply for a trade name. Each filing is $100. So it makes sense. They get twice the money from you. So you create the LLC first, and then later you file something called an application for a registration of a trade name, which is filed with the Secretary of State. Other states have different names for it. I did this in Missouri recently. They call it a fictitious name. So in Nebraska, it's called a trade name. Other states have different names for these things. But the deal is that yes.
I just have, so if you filed under a name and you changed the name of your organization, do you recommend filing for a doing business as, or just like filing a name change of your LLC? Yeah,
it's really up to you. If you're doing it really because it's like, oh, this name is better, I prefer marketing and branding with this name. I would just do an application for a trade name because it's quicker. I mean, even though it costs the same amount of money, it's a quicker process. Yeah. The other downside is that, I mentioned earlier, if you create a new LLC, I suggest that folks publish notice of the creation. You are required to publish notice of a trade name. So you do have to go through like the Omaha Daily Record or what have you. The good news is that at least the Daily Record does this. I don't know about other publications, but there's a requirement that once you publish the notice of the new trade name, and basically the notice just says that, this LLC has now applied for and received this trade name, is going to do business as this trade name, then there is a requirement that the Secretary of State be notified of that publication. The good news is the Daily Record does that for you. So once they publish it, they actually certify, notarized confirmation that publication has occurred. So it does take some time out of the whole process. But yeah, my recommendation generally is just do a DBA rather than going through the process of changing the name of the organization. Yeah. Any other questions? Great question. Actually, the last thing I wanted to talk to was about BOIR. What is BOIR and how much trouble am I in? So real quick, in 2021, the US Congress passed the Corporate Transparency Act. The whole point of it was that there's so many companies and LLCs with these, this LLC name owns this other LLC, and it's totally you have no idea what people are actually involved. So they're trying to get around that. So they passed the Corporate Transparency Act to increase transparency of company ownership structures and to prevent illicit activities. So as part of the Anti-Money Laundering Act, which is part of the National Defense Authorization Act of 2021. The whole point of that, it was this huge thing. The part that's relevant to you is that the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, so the fact that you're going to have to do something with Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, that's scary. Establish rules for requiring beneficial ownership information reporting. Applying to be a nonprofit corporation, you're already giving this information. So this is mostly for LLCs and companies. So here are the requirements. I'll go through them really quickly. If you were created prior to 2024, you don't have to do this until January 1st, 2025. If you were created in 2024, you have 90 days to comply. So if you were created in February and didn't do this, see me. If you're created after January 1st, 2025, you have 30 calendar days to file. And again, as I mentioned, Nebraska Secretary of State, when you file a new company, it doesn't tell you about this. And other states do that. Why not? What do you have to report? It's not that hard. You got to report your legal name, any trade names. So this is stuff that you've already done. You're just putting it on this website. Addresses, all that kind of stuff, where you formed, your EIN or tax identification number, and then usually some proof of identification like a driver's license or a passport. And this is all done on this website, the boi.efiling.fincen.gov. So it's kind of a stressful thing, especially for new companies who haven't done this yet. They may already be out of compliance. And the website actually says that in theory, you could be fined $500 a day for not being in compliance. Kid you not. And that's it. Hi, I'm Dave Pantos. Thanks for listening. It's my email address and website and where I'm located in this building. I'll stick around if you have any other questions, but it sounds like we're at 12:30. Did I talk that long?
You have a lot of information to provide, so I would say you can go over time for sure.
Yeah. So yeah, any other questions for sure? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure he'll. Thank you, Dave, first off, for all the valuable information, and thank you everybody for coming. I'm sure Dave will be happy to stick around for 15 minutes or so.
Absolutely.
He offices out of the space too, so if you're a member or here, you'll see him around.
Yeah, I put business cards up there
Yeah.
too, so you grab one of those if you like.
And then Marcos, if you'd like to come down and talk about AltCap, want to thank AltCap for sponsoring this Lunch and Learn.
That's for me?
And then we also have an awesome gift for Dave.
So nice. Thank you.
Good eye.
You're good. I'm just going to put it there.
Aw.
Thank you, David. Appreciate it. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So AltCap is Alternative Capital. We're a SBA preferred lender. We work closely with banks. We're what a CDFI is a nonprofit. We're certified by the federal government to lend in partnership with banks. So the funding that we have is usually invested in our portfolio by banks, by the federal government, and by private entities. So we focus on micro lending, 50,000 to 150, or actually 25,000 to about 150. We can go above that up to 250, even higher than that in some cases. So, but today, one of the areas of CDFIs, I want to introduce BC Clark. One of the areas that that our mission and that we're somewhat required to do and want to do is what we call technical assistance, business development, coaching, financial education. And so we're out of Kansas City. I've been in this market for over 20 years. And while I was at US Bank, I supported AltCap, so I'm very familiar with what they do and the growth that they've done. So 2 years ago, I was asked to take on the expansion to Omaha. And so in June of last year, we've done well, but now we're positioned to be able to work closely on the technical assistance. We actually have some clients that are going through debt restructuring, some issues with debt and that's BC. So I want to introduce BC Clark. She is really a cornerstone on the business. Her and I have go back quite a bit. And so it was very fortunate to connect with her. So you want to stand up and introduce yourself really quick.
Yeah, so BC Clark and I'm with the Business Connection, and so I do a lot of business development, work with clients as well as getting them ready to even go for a loan. But basically, I do a lot of strategy with them to make sure that they can get their business on the right track and move forward. And so those are the kind of things that I do 20%. I've been doing for over 20-some years. So.
Yep. So going in hand with what Dave was talking about, consultant versus employee. She's on the contract with AltCap to provide those services. She's awesome. She's going beyond because we've got so much work to do and she has so much experience. So she's literally a business development, technical assistant consultant with AltCap. Thank you. Hope to connect if you guys, you're ready too. So we can talk. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much for coming. We would love to hear your feedback. That is the one way that we're going to make these events even better. And then we want to make sure that we're providing topics and speakers of value for you to learn new things. So if you'd like to take a second to provide your feedback on this QR code feedback form, that would be amazing. And then we will have our next Lunch and Learn on October 1st. About sales and sales objections. So if you're involved in the sales process of your business, which if you're a business owner, you should be, this would be a really good Lunch and Learn for you to learn how to properly do sales and take advantage of the objections that you usually get from your clients or your customers. So learn how to kind of switch it to the other way for them to buy, hopefully. So feel free to take a second for this, and then feel free to hang around, network, free co-working for the rest of the day, and then Dave will hang around and chat and one-on-one if you'd like. Thank you so much.
Thank you.